Hello, I hope you are doing great. Today we are going to talk a little bit about how you can dynamically or programmatically create your instances of your entity framework DB context. Now, before we continue, please remember in FairPlayTube, fairplaytube.bticostarica.com, you can help support FairPlayTube and all of the work we have been doing, as well as the videos, by supporting us using the Buy Me a Coffee button in here. So you can click on it and you can choose an amount in there and support it. That will help us a lot. Thank you very much. Now, let's say that for some reason you need to dynamically instantiate your DB context. Now, if you have ever manually created a DB context in Entity Framework, we are going to refer to Entity Framework Core. Uh, but if you have ever instantiated, you will see that the default parameter usually requires that you set some DB context options that are generic options. So basically, you do like an instance of DB context of a generic um, type, right? Which where that type is going to be, I mean, you create an instance of DB context options, right? Of a generic type where that generic type is going to be the type of your um, DB context, and then when you initialize your DB context, you will pass those options. The entity framework engine or framework um, SDK gives you some classes to help you facilitate creating the DB context options. So one of those is a DB context options builder. But the DB context option builder also needs that you do something like set the generic types, right? So let's see an example in a second. So basically you will do something like this, right? DB context, right? Options, and you need to specify a type in there. It will be, I don't know, my DB context or some, in this case, we are going to use DB context, right? Just to show an example, right? And now when you create a new DB context, right, you will pass those options. Now, but this is only um, when you know the actual type, right? This replace this for your actual type, right? Replace this for your actual type, right? I know my custom DB context, right? My bicycle database DB context, right? My account database DB context, whatever you have it, right? Now this works fine when you know your final types. But what happens when you actually want to instantiate that through reflection, because you need to create code and specs metadata on all of that, right? So usually one of the things that you will do is uh, you do something like activator create instance, right? And you need to create an instance of the DB context, right? But to create an instance of the DB context, you first need to create an instance of the DB context options, right? So for the DB context type, you can do something like var dbc type equals type of, right? Your DB context. However, if you do not know or if you don't have a static reference to that type, you need to do that through through reflection, right? So you will do something like assembly dot load, right? Load from an assembly, right? And then let's say load file, right? And then you will do something like get type. You will find the actual type, right? And then you will let's say that you have the type, right? Then you will need to do something like activator dot create instance of that DbC type, right? However, um, yeah, that will be your DB context, right? But then you need the DB context options. So how do you do all of that? So let's say that you have something like DB context options builder and you want to instantiate it, right? I can do something like type of. Mhm. But let's see, I cannot do something like activator dot create instance of this type of, because this will be just a generic type, but I am not passing any argument, so it doesn't know the actual DB context that I will pass, right? Will be DB context or my custom context or my accounting DB context, etc., 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 right? So there is one way to solve that. So this is a source generated application that we created, and one of the things that we have already here is code to generate the models code, right? And we are receiving the DB context type, which was loaded, right? So in order to create the DB context option builder, the thing that you need to do is, yeah, of course, you do the type of, you set the DB context. However, you need to invoke this make generic type method and send the actual type for the DB context, right? Then you instantiate the options builder, right? This is just to get the type information for the generic or for the DB context option builder with the correct DB context generic argument. Then we instantiate the DB context option builder by using the activator create instance. We send the type and then we convert that instance, which is a nullable object, we convert it into a DB context option builder, right? Then one of the things we can do is DB context option builder dot use in memory database, right? Because we want to initialize the in-memory database for the rest of the code we will do in the application. Now we need to get the options, and now one of the things we can do is we can now instantiate the DB context, right? So we create an instance, we set the type is going to be the DB context type, and the argument is going to be the actual options, right? We convert this to a DB context to have the base class, because since we are not aware of the since we are do not have static references to the actual DB context in this application, uh, we can only trust the DB context because that's the only thing that we need. And to read the properties and all of the rest, we actually need to do it through the uh, methods that give us all of the metadata and all of the type information. So now I am going to run this application so you can see how it works. So I run the application and the code will reach the breakpoint where we have that. Remember this this is a source code generator where you pass an assembly, and a DB context. And at the moment, I am actually working or generating source code using FairPlay2 as an example. So you will see that my data access assembly is FairPlay2.dataAccess, and my DB context type is FairPlay2 database context, which is where you have this full name, right? So type of, make generic type, DB context type, and you will see that when I create this DB context type, it will say DB context option builder, right? So yeah, this is a DB context option builder, and we should have generic type arguments in here having the FairPlay2 database context as a generic argument. Now I want to create an instance of this DB context and of this builder, I'm sorry. And here we created DB context options builder, and you see that we have all of the options information in there. Now we invoke the DB using memory database. We get the options variable, and then we instantiate the DB context using the DB context type. See that it is sending FairPlay2 database context, right? And we are going to send the options. The options should uh, be DB context options of a generic argument. You see there we have options of FairPlay2 data access, FairPlay2 database context. And now we instantiate this, and we have our DB context. And if we quick watch this, we will see all of the information in here, right? Now if I do something like this DB context, you see that I only have the generic types and I have no access to the actual tables in here, because that's a base class, right? I am not using the reference to the actual object, because only reflections know it, and I do not have a static reference to that DLL, right? So I cannot really do or access the tables and all that through coding. However, for this specific application, basically what I want to do is get the entity information, right? So I can use dbcontext.model, and I can do things like get um, things like find entity type. I will send the entity type that I receive in the method, and you see that it actually gives me application role. Then I want to do things like finding which is the primary key, right? And you see that it gives me which is the primary key, and I will probably be able to access some of the properties and some other stuff in there. So you will see the properties. It has things like, yeah, this is assured, this is required, right? A lot of information in there. So this actually works for the rest of the code. I also can do things like getting, which is the value generation, basically to check if that entity here has automatic value generation, right? So you will see that in here we have this application role ID, and the value generated is set to on add, right? So basically, if value generation properties are not equal to never, I know that that entity is going to generate a value, right? And then I continue working on the rest of the code, like getting things like, for example, what we are doing in here, that we are using reflection to get custom attributes of that specific type, and to get the string length attribute and the required attribute. However, this source file generator was initially designed to support only um, data access based entities, right? I mean, data annotations based entities instead of Fluent API or configuration based uh, DB context. So if you have a DB context which is not based on data annotations, you will not find the custom attribute in the entity type because that will not exist in there. It will only exist in the configuration. And I haven't finished this code yet, but as far as I know so far, you will only be able to get that from the entity's metadata when your DB context model has already been built. Therefore, you will need to instantiate your DB context, and that's why you need to create all of these instances through reflection to then be able to get the entity and all of the rest of the information through the DB context um, metadata information, I would say. Thank you very much. I hope this has been very useful for you. Please remember, support all of our work by using the Buy Me a Coffee cup and select some amount in there and set your Twitter information in there. Thank you very much and have a great day.